Hello, everyone. Welcome to Backups, your last line of defense webinar. My name is Paige Cooper. I am the marketing communications strategist here at Docs, and we're really excited to have you all here today. In our digital world, data is increasingly valuable, and it's also vulnerable to threats like ransomware. That's why having a strong backup strategy is crucial for any organization. So today, we're going to explore key concepts and best practices for effective backup solutions, including the 3-2-1 rule, protecting backups and ransomware, backing up cloud data, and more. We are thrilled our very own Docs expert is joining us today to share his knowledge. Seth Earle. Seth is a highly experienced IT professional who has helped many organizations safeguard their data against various threats. Seth is passionate about sharing his expertise and has earned numerous industry certifications, showing his dedication to staying up to date with backup and recovery best practices. We are honored to have Seth here today with us to share his insights. So please join me in welcoming Seth Earle.
Thank you. So like Paige said, today backups are becoming more and more important asset to your average company. As ransomware becomes more prevalent, the need to have isolated backups is critical. So today we're just going to go over some basic concepts regarding backups, their management, as well as some of Docs' recommended products. These are all ideas I live by, so I hope you'll take them into consideration when designing your backup infrastructure. To start, why should someone back up their data? Executives always ask this question when backups are brought up because they can't imagine information just disappearing. As mentioned previously, the biggest reason for backups nowadays is ransomware. We're seeing massive influxes of ransomware across the board, and while antivirus and security training do a lot, it can still cause some damage when it sneaks through. We're seeing places where individual computers will get hit and the user was only storing data on that machine, or it's able to slip through because of added credentials with them. So I've started living by the motto of it's not if I get ransomware, it's when I get ransomware. And this is because while luckily I've never seen it happen, there are plenty of stories out there of like a small company or even a medium company getting ransomware and having to shutter their doors just because they don't have copies of their data. They can't pull out engineering designs, they've lost contract information, and they just can't recover from this, and the business has to disappear. The second reason to back up is more physical in nature. Physical data loss is still a concern, no matter how good your equipment is. You could be unlucky. You have a RAID 5 out there. You lose enough disks, it kills the RAID. You could have a fire take out your data center, or an earthquake take out the facility. You can prepare for these by building up designs, redundancy, but not even the best designer can protect against a giant meteor hitting your server closet. Another reason is malicious data loss. We still live in a world with disgruntled employees out there. We can have one show up who decides that if they're being fired, they'll take everything with them. If somebody's deleting their paper trail, fraud, or something questionable they're doing at or to the company, which will increase the corporate liability because now you don't have proof that that person was doing it. And lastly is a more benign reason, regulatory compliance. Certain industries need to keep data for a long time. We commonly see the number 7 years out there for data retention. And while retention labels can do a lot of work, Office 365 emails, SharePoint files, you still can't protect yourself against, the well-meaning employee who's going through and cleaning out their file server of, oh, this project's 5 years old, I'm going to delete that, and now you've just lost, a piece of information you're supposed to keep for 7 years. So keeping the backups of the older data is good just in case that happens. Maliciousness isn't the only reason to be afraid. It can just be a well-meaning employee. So with the why, going into some of the basic concepts of backups, there's two concepts important to maintaining good backups. The first one is the 3-2-1 rule. This one's something that probably every admin's heard. It's basically the idea that if you have important data, you should keep 3 copies of the data in 2 different formats and have a copy of it off-site. What this means is you should have your production copy of data, that's your first copy, your second copy of data, which is your primary backup, and then an off-site backup of your data, a third copy. This way, if something does happen, ransomware hits, there goes your primary backup you can restore, or that meteor hits, there goes your primary and secondary, and now your off-site backups being restored from. This way, any one thing can't take out all of your backups if it can happen. Having things in two formats is generally to stop against like a ransomware attack or some form of data corruption. You can end up with two types of data being a VMDK file in your ESXi server, and then your VBK on your Veeam backup server. The reason for the two separate formats is because we have seen instances where like ransomware will get into the network. It won't be able to infect any of the Windows devices, but it can encrypt the VMDK files on your ESXi host. So now, because you've got the VMDK encrypted, you need to bring back the VBK because that was resistant to that specific ransomware attack. And so having the multiple formats helps protect against these kinds of attacks without having to do stuff like pull a hard drive off site or anything like that. Speaking of, I guess, pulling hard drives off site, the last concept, the off-site copy. This one is important mainly for physical damage, or even in the instance of a ransomware getting all of your equipment, you have a copy that isn't local to your data center. When I started at Docs, the most common method of offsite backups was just a hard drive. Copy all of your backups to a hard drive. The owner pulls it out every Friday or whatever and takes it home. And then, every Friday they pull a different hard drive home, or they're rotating between like 3 or 4 drives. This is good for short-term backups. Maybe your compliance isn't going to be good with it, but it does stop you from getting ransomware, because now you're only losing up to a week of data versus everything at once because it got through the environment. Nowadays, with how cheap cloud storage is getting, we are seeing more and more pushes to like Azure storage blobs, AWS S3 buckets, or Wasabi S3 buckets. This way, people aren't having to take a physical drive home. It's done. It's taken care of. You don't have to manage the storage. Let somebody else do it, and they probably have better reliability than you, because if a house burns down or something, you've lost the data. Amazon's not burning down anytime soon, hopefully. And if they do, we've kind of got bigger issues there. So that's kind of the biggest concept. The other big concept is you need to protect the backups. With ransomware coming out, it's more and more common. We're seeing it everywhere, and they're starting to attack our backups. They're seeing companies restore from backups, and so the ransomware is coming out and attacking backups first. Usually, we're seeing it being reported. I haven't seen it personally, but I've seen like articles about it where a new type of ransomware may come in. It'll sit on a computer for a month or two, and in that time, it'll try to find where your Veeam backups are, where your Datto backups are, and it will. When it actually triggers, it will try to encrypt those backups first before going after the rest of your network. This way, even if you find it, you can't stop it. The backups are gone. You can't restore from it, and so you have to pay the ransom. So because of this, we have a couple basic ideas of what we're doing to protect the backups. The first one is we're pulling the backup servers off of domains nowadays. Active Directory is great. Single username, you can change the password, manage all your protections there. But the downside of it is if somebody gets a hold of a username in Active Directory, they have access to everything. This includes backup servers. If somebody gets a hold of a domain admin password and it's not multi-factor because it's like a service account or something, they can now break into your Veeam server, encrypt all of your backups. So what we're starting to do nowadays is we're pulling the servers off the domain. This way, it's local accounts only. We'll throw like a multi-factor of Duo on the server. This way, you can't spread out to the server. It's isolated. They'll have to use some other attack instead of a stolen password. The second process that we're doing with these backups is just trying to isolate them. Nowadays, as more and more firewalls are getting, they're getting more powerful in the long run, we're starting to do more port filtering and run some of the core switch IDs through the firewalls. So what we can do is we can take our backup server, put it on its own isolated VLAN subnet, and throw like our Synology NAS on that same subnet, and then use the firewall to stop inbound connections unless from protected ports. Block RDP unless it's coming from a management port, unless it's coming from one of your trusted servers. Block maybe a Veeam console or something inbound. This way, you don't have to worry about somebody reconnaissing and breaking through that port. On the flip side, we then allow Veeam outbound or whatever backup software, because the backup software is initiating its connections from the server. The backup targets aren't reaching out to the Veeam server or the backup server. And so with that, that adds an extra layer of protection because now you don't have to worry about things breaking in there. You've got that isolated, and you don't have to worry about drive-by attacks or a ransomware getting through because SMB's turned off or what have you. Third, I kind of mentioned this previously with the Duo, but multi-factor your backups. Any kind of authentication, anything that's important, you should have multi-factor on it. For the off-domain servers, we're using Duo because it works very well on off-domain networks. Any of our cloud backup systems, we're enforcing multi-factor to log into those systems, because if you can get a hold of the backups, either you can potentially delete them if they're configured improperly, or restore them elsewhere and steal all that data. The stuff needs to be multi-factored to protect the data entirely. And lastly, a nice form of protection for the backups in case all else fails and they start encrypting your backups, turn on immutability. With the advent of Amazon's S3 buckets and with them pushing that out to the world, immutability has become a more common thing. Immutability is the concept that when you put a file up into an environment, you can make it immutable for X number of days. And what that means is that if something tries to edit that file, it can't. The file is locked in stone for however long. We usually do a 30-day immutability here. This way, if all else fails, they get in, they encrypt our backups. Whenever our backup software tries to replicate into the cloud or to an on-site repository, it can't overwrite our backups with that encrypted copy. The backups are safe, and now we're not losing as much data. We still have the latest 30 days of backups. And while it could hurt compliance purposes, it doesn't take down the company, and it's easier to recover from that than losing everything. Another thing to think about with backups is you need to back up your cloud. Microsoft, Google, all of them, they don't take ownership of your data in the way that a lot of people think they do. Microsoft, for instance, they don't promise to back up your data. They do best effort. You've got the Exchange recovery box, the OneDrive recycle bin. You've got retention labels to move stuff around. But if somebody deletes something and then comes back and says, "Hey, I need this," Microsoft doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to get that back. Microsoft's promise is the data that you have at this second, they will try to make sure you have it at this second. Data that got deleted a month ago, they don't care about because that isn't their job. They're saying that the admins have to have ownership over the backing up of their data, their Office, SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive, Google Workspace, things like that. And so you really need to do it, especially with everything going more and more cloud. Cloud ERP systems, you make sure there's a backup process for that. Really, any SaaS that's critical to the company, you have to work on backups. The big downside of having to have these backups is it is starting to funnel people more and more towards the larger conglomerates. Smaller SaaS products don't have the APIs or the hooks to back up their data. And so it is funneling people more towards Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, the big companies that the backup software is realizing it's worth time than to try and back up some, SaaS ERP that's only used in a couple of states. It is a downside, but you do want to try and back up as much of this as possible. You do want to be in 365 because of that reliability of the backups. And with talking about all these backup concepts, it then leads into, well, how do I back up the data? There's plenty of vendors out there, and some are good. A lot of them are bad. We've gone through a decent number of them. Back when I started, we had some backup exec, and now we're moving towards, a more modern approach with Veeam. We're seeing things like Barracuda, Synology, different cloud backup tools. And so I kind of want to just put out the ones that I use the most, the ones that I recommend when talking about backups. So to start, we have the cloud backups. With cloud backups, we have a choice to make. The first choice is Do we want to have our data backed up locally, so to local storage inside our data center, or do we want to back it up to another cloud? For companies with a large physical footprint, on-premise makes sense. You've already got a bunch of Synologies, or you've already got spare server space. Spin up a Veeam for 365 or turn on Synology's backup. For smaller companies, all cloud, they don't really have the choice. You kind of have to have cloud backups because you don't have anything on-premise to begin with. So for cloud backups, so backups that are backup to another cloud provider, I've worked with two of them that I really like. The first one is Barracuda Cloud to Cloud Backup. This is a cloud backup tool made by the same company who does like the spam filters, email archivers. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this company. With this tool, you connect to Office 365, and it will run regular backups of your data, every couple of hours, every day, and keep that backup. As an admin, you have the ability to then sort through all of that data and restore it back to any location in the Office 365 environment. By default, Barracuda also keeps your data forever. If you have retention rules in place that you want to lower your retention, you can manually set them, but for the licenses that you pay, Barracuda keeps infinite retention by default. The other cloud-based backup provider that we deal with is Druva. Druva specifically, we recommend for the Druva Fed offering, which is a FedRAMP solution. This is our primary backup vendor for our GCC High customers. Works the same. It works as Barracuda. You have an app in the environment. It connects in to your Office 365 environment, and then it will back up the data daily. The big difference, though, is Druva by default doesn't have a retention plan. You have to go in and tell it how long to keep your backups. So if you need to have 7 years of backups, you have to tell it, keep my backups for 7 years. It is a little bit different on that end, but it does allow for tighter retention by default. Another nice feature on Druva's side over Barracuda is Druva does have a self-service restore portal. So users, if they realize that they deleted something, or I accidentally overwrote this Word document or something, they can go to Druva's self-service portal and restore that document themselves. There's no need to involve the admins. It's just something any user can restore any file that they have backed up. Both these products back up Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, all of the different pieces, parts of Office 365. Druva does back up Google Workspace, and unfortunately Barracuda does not. Barracuda only backs up the Office 365 side. For on-prem solutions, we have two of them that I've really liked. The first one is Veeam for Office 365. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Veeam. This is another offering by them. It backs up all Office 365 environments. So backup commercial, GCC High, backs it all up locally to the server. It does require a separate server install. So you can't put it on your Veeam backup and replication server. It has to be on its own Windows server for the backup purposes. But it'll let you run reoccurring backups. It basically functions the same as Veeam, but backing up an Office 365 repository. It is a admin restore product only, so users can't go in and self-restore themselves. The admin would have to go through and restore what documents or emails have to be restored there. It's also licensed on a per user basis. So whenever you go out, you have to select how many mailboxes, how many groups are being backed up, and you have to buy licenses for them. Barracuda and Druva are both the same way. But for a free backup solution, we can then look at Synology. I'm sure a lot of you may have a Synology NAS somewhere in your environment. Synology provides a free backup tool. This is one that's just built into the Synologies. You can grab it off of their app store, and then you set it up, and it will back up your Office 365. Unlike Veeam, it will only back up commercial Office 365. I went ahead, checked in with their support, and they don't have a roadmap for GCC High support, so only backup commercial right now. It's also has a user self-service restore portal, just like the Druva side. I admittedly haven't used it, and I'm a little bit wary because it does require the user going straight to the Synology, which breaks our previous idea of isolating the backups from the rest of your network. But it does allow for self-service if you decide to allow that feature. I would just personally be wary of it because now you're exposing your backups to every computer on the network. Even if it is technically a different web server, the risk is still there. So that's the cloud side. For server backups, we really only have one program that we recommend, that I personally recommend. And yeah, I've said it a couple of times, but it's Veeam Backup and Replication. I've gone through, I've used the different ones, Datto, Druva, Datto, Druva on premise, Backup Exec. I've tried the enables like backup software, StorageCraft, and I haven't found any that I really like outside of Veeam. It will handle backing up all of your different hypervisors, Hyper-V, VMware, Windows, Windows and Linux standalone boxes, and soon they're going to be providing support for Proxmox after all this whole VMware debacle that happened earlier this year. So they are expanding as well, and we'll be able to back up all of the common hypervisors out there. Veeam as a product covers a lot of the bases I look for in the backup software. It does things, does the backups simple enough, but it also covers the different pieces to fulfill, the 3-2-1 rule. It'll let you do backing up your cloud. So if you have AWS servers or Azure servers, it'll back those up. It kind of covers everything that you need in terms of backup. But then it also allows for replication. It does easy replication to other hard drives, physical hard drives, Synologies, different NASs, cloud providers. It's a very bundled software to hit all the bases on 3-2-1 rule. Veeam also can auto test your backups for you. We currently do it on a nightly basis using their feature called Sure Backup. It's nice because in kind of the backup world, there's the idea that an untested backup isn't a backup. It's just a hard drive that may or may not have your data on it. So having a system that will go through, automatically boot your test up servers, run integrity checks, make sure that the actual Windows and Linux servers are working regularly is a great feature because it takes a lot of that stress off of you of knowing, well, if I get hit, will my backups work? And you'll get a report every day saying, yes, your backups will work. It does take some tweaking. Took us about 6 months to get our backups, like the testing, to an acceptable rate. But once it's set, we just get the report every day. There's no extra work involved. Backups are automatically added to it, and it does all of the testing for us. Veeam, like I mentioned earlier, Veeam will copy your backups for you easily as well. You can set a copy off to a hard drive every day. So we have backups run, and then they copy themselves to a Synology as well. We also have it set up to where we have a Wasabi S3 bucket automatically attached to our Veeam server, and it will copy our backups as soon as they're created. There's no manual work required for it. As soon as a backup's done, it starts uploading it to the cloud and then makes that backup immutable for 30 days. It takes all of the work out of having to, protect your backups in the long run. It just does it all for you. That works if you're using like an S3 bucket. So AWS, Wasabi, really a lot of the different like block storage providers will provide the immutability for you. Lastly, unlike a lot of the different backup software that we've seen where they may nickel or dime you for different extra features, Veeam comes with a lot of the granular backup features built in. You can do Active Directory restore, so you restore individual user, computer accounts, file level restores. If you have an on-premise Exchange, you can go ahead and use that as your email backup and just pull out individual emails from the Exchange server and restore it for you. It covers a lot of bases in making your life easier. So I do highly recommend it. Veeam is changing their licensing, so it is starting to back up on a per VM basis, but overall it is worth it, I think, overall. I recommend it for everybody. We've got all of our customers on it. The ones that I have control over, I have them on Veeam, and I highly recommend it as the primary backup software. So with that's really covers just the quick rundown of backups. These are the products that I like to use. These are the concepts I like to run by. I don't know if anybody has any questions for it, or if Paige, you want to take over here.
Well, thank you, Seth, for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. We really appreciate your expertise and insights into this topic and all these best practices. So like Seth said, we'd love to open the floor in the chat for any questions from our attendees if we have any. So Seth, what are some common misconceptions or pitfalls organizations face when implementing backup strategies, and how can they be avoided?
One interesting one that we see people trying to back up too often. If you have a larger environment and not really solid backup equipment, we see people trying to do like an hourly backup so that their restore time, if I get hit or if somebody deletes a file, how much data is lost. We're seeing people try to do that too often with the equipment that they have, and so they need to space out your backups. Maybe an hourly isn't good enough or isn't necessary for what you're actually trying to back up, or you need to back up a small subsection of backups on a quicker basis versus the daily basis. We're also seeing people not back up enough or not really know what they want to back up. Maybe they're just backing up the file server. Maybe they're just backing up an individual SQL server because they don't want to have to go through and back up the whole infrastructure because of storage costs or some other thing. But then if they get hit by a ransomware, they don't have the rest of the infrastructure needed to get that SQL server working or that file server working.
It looks like we have a specific question. So any particular hardware? We are using Stonefly with Veeam.
We're not seeing any specific hardware. So most of our Veeam servers, we're actually going through with the virtualizing process. So a lot of our Veeam servers are just VMs sitting on an ESXi host and then having the rest of the data isolated. Really, any Windows box, we do recommend like Synologies for the on-premise NAS side of things. Most of our backup software is just hardware agnostic. If it can run Windows, it can generally run Veeam. You do want to feed it more RAM. RAM is a pretty big piece, as well as making sure that you have a decently sized NIC. Right now, we have a couple customers with 10 gig NICs on their Veeam because they do have a larger backup environment. And then one thing is with like the virtualization, you want to have whatever server is hosting your Veeam server, you want to have it big enough to run potentially multiple Veeam servers. Veeam has a concept that is like it's a proxy server. It's basically a helping server. You can spin up these either Windows or Linux boxes, connect them back to your main Veeam server, and then they will also back up servers. So if you have 100 servers, you can spin up a couple proxies so that instead of just one server backing up one Veeam server backing up one VM at a time, you can have one Veeam server and 4 proxies backing up 5 VMs at a time. So you need to make sure you have the CPU usage and the RAM on whatever server you're using to utilize that. Otherwise, it can be anything. HP, Dell, Synology, QNAPs. There isn't really a hard and fast recommendation there.
And then could you expand a little bit on full image backups versus file backups?
So the full image backup is you're backing up the whole VM. So if you have a file server, you're backing up the whole file server. Whereas a file backup, you're only backing up like a file shared, the individual docx or PDF files. Different types of backups really depend on what you're doing. For our clouds, the clouds are all file level backups. They are just backing up your individual SharePoint files, your OneDrive, the emails. They're not backing up the backend Exchange servers. Whereas on premise, you're going to want to back up your whole server, because having the file level backups are nice. But if you get hit with a ransomware attack or something, you don't want to just have files, because then you have to rebuild the whole server. You have to rebuild all of your share permissions. Basically, you're stuck having to rebuild however much of a complex environment you have. Whereas if you back up the whole thing, it's a lot easier to restore that. Your time to restore is a lot quicker in the long run, which makes it less painful for you. If you restore the data drive on your file server and everything gets ransomed, now you have to rebuild the file server, file permissions, everything, versus just reloading the file server right then and there. For cloud backups, file is really the only way you can go. But cloud backups, you're also not worrying about losing the operating system on those. Microsoft won't be going down, whereas your Windows server can go down at any point. You may need to move that to a new server.
As remote work becomes more prevalent, what additional considerations should organizations keep in mind when designing backup strategies for remote employees, devices, and data?
Remote employees, they don't have too much like extra consideration. It depends on what environment you're really trying to go with the remote employees. So like you've got, if they're still using the on-premise file server, you're just gonna be backing up the file server. But what should be happening more and more is as people move to cloud storage potentially, we're seeing more OneDrive usage, things like that. There should be more OneDrive folder redirection. So, just like the old days where you used to have your home drive on the file server, now you can have your documents folder in OneDrive. And then you deploy your Barracuda or Veeam backup to back up the OneDrives. This way, when their laptop dies, they're not losing data. But this is applying more and more for just general workstations as well. I have people who don't use their computers at home. I turn on the OneDrive redirection just because if they lose their computer, OneDrive will be there. And then we back up their OneDrive to keep that as a full backup. One thing that's also nice with that is with the OneDrive, having OneDrive copy data and then having the offsite backup, you are or the like Synology or Barracuda backup, you are now satisfying 3-2-1 because you have the production on the laptop, the OneDrive backup, and then the backup of OneDrive. So that is a nice extra piece of backing data to OneDrive, as well as somebody's laptop dies, you can just throw them on a new laptop and off they go. There's no extra work that has to be done.
How can organizations effectively test and validate their disaster recovery plans to ensure they can quickly recover from a ransomware attack or a data loss event?
This one's always a hard one. It depends a lot on the environment. Disaster recovery plans usually require you to have to sit down, figure out what's actually critical and what's nice. So, one example is Docs. Docs, we have 4 servers that are critical. And then we have like a domain controller, our vCenter, tertiary to it. But like our file server isn't critical because we use a lot of cloud storage. Our accounting server can be restored at a later date, but for operation set, we have found about 4 critical servers and then 4 servers that are needed to work to get those critical servers working. So first you have to figure that out, and then when we do our DR testing, we end up grabbing an old ESXi host. So we have an HP server from a previous refresh, and our disaster recovery process is just install all the pieces on that server, see how long it takes, see what it takes to get up to operational standards, and go from there. We have that scheduled, I think, annually on our side, just to strip down the ESXi host, rebuild it, and restore backups to it, because that's really all we need for larger environments. It may be something you want to do quarterly, but it does require you to have a whole second set of equipment. We do have some customers where if they have like a critical application that the whole company uses, what they like to do is they will have a replica in a second data center or maybe a VM in the cloud, and they'll set up like a point-to-point tunnel to the cloud out there, and they will just kill their production server, turn on the backup server, and then have users work from that for a day or two. And then when all is said and done, after hours, back up the cloud server, restore it as the production server. It depends on how much testing you want to do and how trustworthy you are of your backups to begin with, and also your plan. can you run a backup for a week and then back that up, restore it back to be the production server? Do you trust that process as a whole? Because if so, having your users run off the disaster recovery environment is probably the best test to it. You know, us admins can always do a test all day until we're blue to the face, but until a user touches that disaster recovery, you don't really know. So I guess it depends on what your disaster recovery plans are and what you're trying to figure out with it for how far you go. You know, is it just an old ESXi host, or do you do a full restore and make users work off of the environment? It depends on what your plan's looking at there.
As we wrap up today's webinar, I just want to thank everyone for attending. We really hope that you found the information that Seth presented valuable and actionable. To help you put today's insights into practice, we're going to be sending all attendees a comprehensive backup strategy checklist. This resource will help ensure you're covering all of your bases and implementing the best practices that we discussed today. In addition, please keep an eye on your inbox for a recording of today's webinar. Feel free to share with your colleagues or refer back to it whenever you need a refresher. And before we sign off, I just want to take a moment to highlight this quarterly webinar series. These events are designed to keep you informed about the latest trends, strategies, and best practices in the ever-evolving world of IT and cybersecurity. So mark your calendars for our next webinar. It's on encryption, securing your digital assets. This session will take place on Wednesday, September 18th at 11 a.m. and will explore the crucial role of encryption and protecting your organization's sensitive data. Finally, I just want to remind you that Docs is here to support you in all of your cybersecurity and data protection needs. Our team of experts is dedicated to helping organizations like yours implement robust backup strategies, enhance your overall security posture, and stay ahead of emerging threats. If you want to learn more about Docs and how we can assist your organization, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can contact our team by calling 1-888-NEED-DOCS or email us at info@docsnet.com. We're always happy to answer any questions you might have or discuss how our services can benefit your organization. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in September and continuing to support you in safeguarding your valuable data. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.